Be honest with me, dear, and whatever you do, remember you're mine, dear, so always be true. Wherever you wander, on land or on sea, if you really love me, be honest with me. My poor heart would break, dear, if you were untrue. Asleep or awake, dear, I'll dream of you. For you are my darling, you're all that I see. If you really love me, be honest with me. Someday I'll return.
I stick around in my father's general merchandise store to overhear men talking around the white-bellied stove. They are saying that our old Holland Dutch village is going to pass out of the picture. They say that they hear men by the name of Whitehead or White or Brown or something like that have bought up half of the side of Overlook Mountain, and they are going to change Woodstock into an art colony.
Many have visions of utopia, but few are able to turn them into reality. One who did was the wealthy Englishman Ralph Radcliffe Whitehead. Whitehead was born in 1854 in Yorkshire, England, against a background of smoke, soot, and child labor. Young Whitehead spent his boyhood in a conventional upper-class manner. It was at Balliol College that he met and came under John Ruskin's influence, the philosophical fountainhead of the arts and crafts movement. By 1891, Whitehead planned to bring his ideal community into existence in America. In 1892, Whitehead sailed to the United States and built Arcady, a 200-acre estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Montecito, California. Among many visitors was the young American writer and social worker, Hervey White.
Well, Hervey was, like so many human beings, contradictory in a sense. He was born in a small town in Iowa, was taken by his father to live in a sod house on the Kansas prairie. He lived at a time when populism was very strong in the Middle West. And this was a belief that was opposed to the bankers and the rulers of the country, and yet it wasn't socialist. It was a very specifically American thing, and Hervey White was very much into this. He went to Hull House in Chicago, which was the beginning of the settlement house movement in the United States. It was modeled on a London house, Toynbee House, which had been started by a man who attended Balliol College at Oxford, which was Ralph Whitehead's college a year or two earlier. And it was while he was at Hull House that he met Ralph Whitehead. And Hervey supposed that Whitehead, who was a modest man in his behavior, was poor. Actually, he was very rich. And so he treated him to a very inexpensive meal in some place he knew, where he got a great deal of food for a small sum of money. And so Whitehead returned the next day by having Hervey to dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in Chicago.
In 1901, Whitehead hired Hervey White and Bolton Brown. and the search for his utopia went ahead with positive urgency.
Last winter was a hard one, Miss Valley, did you say? Well, yourself that knows that it is for me today. Your husband was the only man sat behind the wall. My old man McGinnis couldn't get a job at all. Rise up, Mrs. Riley, don't give away the blues. You and I'll cut a shine, new bonnets and new shoes. Hear the young ones cry, we'll neither sigh nor sob. We'll wait till the times gets better and McGinnis gets the job. Work up on the railroad, shovel.
I don't know what an art colony is, so I asked my father. He is not acquainted with artists. He read that they are bohemian. I asked what that was, and he said a kind of free thinking. At the same time, he said he didn't know as that it ought to bother Woodstock much, because all thinking is pretty free, as far as he knows.
Springtime is coming, work will surely get. McGinnis go back the street again to make the handsome clerk. See him climb the ladder, nimble as a fox. Face he the boy can handle the old three-cornered box. Right up, Mrs. Riley, don't give away the blues. You and I'll cut a shine.
In the spring of 1902, Whitehead, White, and Brown set out to find a definite site for their colony. The first two headed for Virginia and the Carolinas, while Brown made for New York State. After 3 weeks of explorations, Brown emerged near the crest of a ridge of overlooked mountain. He stared down almost in disbelief. Like Balboa, I first saw my South Sea. Brown came upon an old man. He asked the man the name of the earthly paradise.
I don't live here.
The people in Woodstock make like
the way things change
the
rather
town.
slowly, and therefore you can always come back to it. And
It'll be the same.
places
Yeah, it'll
will
always
have
be the
changed,
same.
but the stories are the same.
Whitehead would have none of the Catskills. I won't go there. They are full of Jews. But Woodstock was entirely without Jewish landowners, shopkeepers, or boarding houses. He hesitated, then suddenly made up his mind. Well, all right, let's have it here.
Seven farms were needed for the colony, comprising about 1,200 acres, and there would have to be buildings built and roads built, and in general a great deal of effort done. And he felt that he, as an Englishman in white flannels, would be inappropriate there at that time, and that his presence would raise the price of the farms. He was quite right in that. So he left it to Bolton Brown, who was a very shrewd man. He did the buying, and he did it in a way that modern real estate speculator would have been proud of. The sense of a group of people who were innovative and creative and interested above all in living in a way that emphasized the less commercial aspects of life, emphasized the arts, music, literature, the theater. All that came into being in 1902, Bolton Brown, one of the three men who had joined to find the colony, Ralph Whitehead, graduate of Oxford, son of a rich manufacturing family in Yorkshire in England, and Herbie White, social worker, poet, novelist. These three came together on the last day of May in 1902 and looked down from Meads. And they looked down and they knew that they had found what they were looking for. What they wanted was a place of which John Ruskin would have approved. And that meant that it had to be at an elevation of from 1,000 to 1,500 feet. Ruskin believed that higher elevations were too harsh for people to live in and do creative work. The seacoast was too enervating, but at that elevation, the elevation of what came to be known as Bird Cliff, a good life and favorable conditions for creative work could be found. So that day in May, they recognized that they had found what they wanted. It also had to be a place that was not too harsh, a place where grapes and wheat would grow well, and also a place which had to be, for economic reasons, fairly close to large centers of population. Thus they could sell their products, which they hoped to make, their furniture and their textiles and their pottery and the other craft objects.
Wherever you wander, on land or on sea, if you really love me, be honest with me.
Some of them are not strong in the church, or so my father had heard. And some of the pictures they paint don't look like anything anybody has seen. He wasn't taking the art colony as seriously as some were. He guessed they'd get along all right in Woodstock if they behaved themselves.
When Bird Cliff started functioning in the spring of 1903, Herbie became the head of the farming. He lived in the farmer's house, and he was in charge of the big barns. Farming was very important there. It was to be, as far as possible, self-sufficient, this colony. And the milk and the maple syrup and the eggs and meat and hay for the horses. This was before the automobile. Ralph Whitehead hated automobiles, and there were no automobiles there till about 1911. And they depended on horses, so there had to be hay, and there had to be straw, and there had to be oats. And so Herbie White was in charge of this end of things. But all this time, Herbie had felt that Whitehead was a dilettante, and that someday he would tire of this colony idea and go on to something else. And then he and some of his friends would step up and offer to take it over. But when Bird Cliff was started, it was not done in a way that Herbie White had expected, and particularly in the amount of money spent on plumbing. Every building had water. Every building had a big bathtub. Every building, no matter how small, had a little sleeping porch because Whitehead believed in fresh air. And he wrote in 1903 in the magazine called Handicraft that one reason for the appeal of the upper class of Britain is their indulgence in outdoor sports and their use of the tub. And to him, the use of the tub was very important. To Herbie, this was a very minor matter. But it involved immense expense, miles and miles of pipe, you know, blasted through rock ledges in some places. And this insistence on plumbing wrecked his idea of taking it over because the capital invested, which has been estimated around $500,000, which was a great deal more then, was far beyond anything he could possibly hope. And then Whitehead and White and Vanderloo, who was helping Herbie run the farm, they had a disagreement because whereas in 1902, when Bird Cliff was bought, was a magnificent season with a great deal of rain and sunshine in between, and as I wrote somewhere, roses were the size of cabbages and everything. Nature did her best that year, and it charmed Whitehead when he came near at the end of May. It was a fairyland, Woodstock. But immediately after he had been ensnared by the landscape, it started to deteriorate, and by 1904, there was hardly any rain. And they had a herd of cattle. Everyone at Bird Cliff got milk from the cows, and Herbie White, in his democratic way, decided the proper thing to do was to give everyone proportionately less milk, which he did, and that included Whitehead. It never occurred to him that Whitehead would object, but he did. He said, here I am running this whole thing. I paid for it all. It's my show, and I can't even get enough milk from it for my family. And so at that, Herbie decided he'd had it and announced that he was leaving.
Someday I'll return, dear,
But it would be too bad if the artist comes swarming down off the mountain and wreck us with sin. That's what Brooke Romer said. Brooke Romer's our best friend. He was only a little drunk this afternoon. He drinks more and is good for him, Jack Moran says. And Jack knows because he drinks quite a lot himself.
Walk the road again, boys, walk the road again. Well, it was fair, comb my hair, walk the road again. Now I'm on the road, boys.
When Herbie White chose the site for his colony, he picked a farm on low land, saying one gets so tired of climbing a hill to get one supper. It's better to live in the valley.
If ever I strike a job again, I'll walk the road no more.
With the help of Fritz Vanderloo, who paid half, they purchased a farm of 102 acres just outside Woodstock. During the Mavericks' second summer, a new powerful force came to Woodstock. It was the summer school of the Arts Students League of New York.
So about 1905, when after Herbie White had left, and after Burge Harrison had left, and after Bolton Brown had left, the Art Students League, which had had a summer school in Connecticut, decided to come to Woodstock, largely through the influence of John F. Carlson, who had been a scholarship student at the Birdcliff School. And they started up in 1906 in the middle of the village. But whereas the Birdcliff experiment had been set on a mountainside above the village, you look down on the village in more senses than one, and it has little to do with it as possible. This was alien territory. You were in Superior Enclave up on the mountain. School was right in the middle of Woodstock, the hamlet of Woodstock. So the Woodstock people saw them all the time. They boarded, or they lived out in fields under a piece of canvas. Some of them lived on 25 cents to 35 cents a day. They'd get a bowl of milk at a farm at milking time. And that was their principal meal. And the Woodstock people saw them and marveled at them, but they couldn't help liking them. They were very young, very high-spirited, full of pranks and full of laughter. And while they baffled the townspeople, particularly when they took to shaving their heads in circles and squares and triangles, other odd behavior, they were, in a way, they were amusing. Birdcliff people were never amusing. They're very serious, but respected because of their money and because of their gentility. About 1911, when landscape painters discovered the snowy landscape of America as a subject for painting, they began to stay here. The Art Students League students who had then studied long enough to set up on their own, they built little studios in Woodstock or made over corn cribs or pigsties or other outbuildings into studios and stayed here through the winter and painted the winter landscape. There was a matter of a lot of comment around 1911. So it was happening then that they were pouring into Woodstock from that time on. And then there was another great influx in the 20s. You see, the First World War had effects on all aspects of life. And this was when the real boom started in point of numbers. The number of people who arrived in the 20s was very large following the end of the First World War. And it changed, and there was talk of it becoming a fashionable summer resort, and people were worried that the art colony would die out and be swamped by commercialism, by the shops on Tinker Street, and by the real estate speculation. The prices of land were going up, up, up until artists couldn't afford to live in Woodstock. And that was in the 1920s, just as we hear it now. And we were saved by the Depression of the 30s.
In 1915, the Maverick and the Woodstock Art Colony began to join forces. And the increased population on the Maverick strained the few dug wells beyond their capacity and became necessary to have a new well drilled. Finding himself $1,500 in debt, he took the advice of several musicians living nearby, who suggested that a fete be held to pay for the well. And in 1916, the first Maverick Festival took place.
We decided to stay there. And we lived in summer cottages. We had no light, we had kerosene lamps. We had no water. We had a great 550-foot deep well that we had to pump to get our water. And the reason for the Maverick festivals was the fact that Hervey he was very stubborn. He struck rock, the blue stone that Woodstock is built on practically, and he wouldn't stop until they drilled 550 feet. And in order to pay that off, he had to do something, and that's when he established the Maverick festivals.
At that time, they were freer than most people in Woodstock.
Woodstock?
We don't know.
You think Elsie Spiker was screwing around, for heaven's sakes?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I don't know either.
I'm going around saying people are...
That's for sure, right? That's for sure.
Yeah. I don't know, but it was funny.
But it is true. You had the reputation for being freer, and it really helped.
And the Maverick festivals, you know.
Well, of course, that helped the reputation first.
Yeah. May I say what
wonderful.
Petra's idea of married folks was? I'm going to say it. Petra thought a married man was something you found in the bushes at the Maverick Festival. Honestly.
That's wonderful. I like that.
I like it too. And it was true up to a point.
To a certain extent.
We are not anarchists, that onlookers might judge us from the freedom exhibited in our clothes. Woodstock is a group of idealists. Hervey White.
The only trouble is that there are so many artists that they are beginning to edge down to the village. I've overheard it said that some of them are well-to-do and don't have much regard for money. It takes a queer set not to care anything about a steady job, or farming, or money, or anything but art. A lot of them wear funny clothes and hats, or next to nothing. Mostly they seem to roam around the village with lots of time on their hands. I overhear it said that a little work goes a long way with artists.
Everybody was telling how they got to Woodstock, and you know, Woodstock is really lucky. I was working at the library and left the library because I couldn't get any work done. It was a nighttime job. I decided that if I went to an art colony, I would be among artists, friendly, wonderful, generous people. And I had a choice of two colonies that I could have gone to. I had a name in Woodstock, which was Arnold Blanche, and a name in Provincetown, a man called Pfeiffer, who ran an art supply store. I started hitchhiking. And the nature of hitchhiking is you can never direct the people that pick you up the way to go. I ended up further west, so I was closer to Woodstock than I was to Provincetown. And it was just an accident of being picked up by the wrong kind of people that I ended up in Woodstock.
Weren't we lucky?
Yes, I said, I mentioned that. Otherwise, I could have been the Charles Hawthorne of Provincetown. End of story.
He said, well, you know, he was a wise man, Harvey, a poet, a writer. You know perfectly well, or I'm telling you, that you couldn't live here alone. Here it is in November. Not a soul around but me. You're not used to this. It'd be very unhappy for you. So I have a proposition. I have 4 cottages here. You go back to New York, but next spring you come back with 4 couples. Which I did. So so next spring, the 4 couples come there, and the 4 cottages are wonderfully kept up. Everything's fine, and it was a lovely, lovely place, isolated from everything, you know, just woods. Now I'll tell you, what do you think he charges for us? That's very important, very, very important. $100 a year, and you can pay it any time, any way you want to do it. Since I stayed there longer than the others, you know, stayed there years and years and years, he built a studio for me, which was even bigger than the house. And that was $50 extra a year.
At that time, there was no discussion of future, but because of Arnold and Harry, they had heard of Woodstock and Hervey White's colony of the Maverick, and went up there to see it, and decided that we would go up to Woodstock. I left. I had another scholarship to the League, but I left, and we went to Woodstock. Carl Walters and Helen Walters, Arnold Blanche and Lucille Blanche, and Harry and myself were the original artists who settled in Hervey's colony. His colony had been, before that, restricted to writers and musicians, and he built the wonderful concert hall, which still continues in its remarkable way. Then he decided that he would go in for the visual and plastic arts and invite young people to come and establish a life there and activity, and that's how it happened. We were the original 3 families who went to the Maverick.
I was living in Woodstock for a few summers.
Oh, right.
And I was making frames for John Carroll and for his show. And Arnold I got to know, and Arnold said, why don't you move over to the Maverick? And he introduced me to Hervey, and Hervey built a house for me.
He built a house.
He had it built for me out of old logs, or slabs.
Slabs, yeah.
And got a beautiful studio window.
Frank Maley says that if you were an artist, you got a window.
If
you were a writer, you didn't get a window.
That's right.
Yeah, Herbie didn't like windows much.
And you got a beautiful studio window and a lovely fireplace, and that was it. Wendy and Jane came with me because I was the monitor of the class they were in at the League.
I see.
And we became friends, and we all sort of came together, didn't we?
Yes, and you came up, and we came up here. Well, Wendy came up then. He wasn't here one summer, and then he came, and we decided to get married. And we asked Hervey for a house. And he said, well, you can have. I said, we wanted the Edie house. He said, not a good enough house to put wiring in. Oh, you can have the LeMay house.
Well, that's right.
We plastered it and put electricity in it. And he let you have that. And he let us have it for $150 a year. And he let you have electricity. Yep.
He disapproved of
He
that.
didn't like it because one winter day I said, it's freezing. He said, go home and turn on all that all those electric lights. He was right in a way. And that's how that was in 1931 that we settled in the Maverick. And Jean was just up the road.
And we had lamps at first, all lamps.
Kerosene.
Can I tell a slightly indecent story?
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Well, I had an electric pan. And every time everybody's radio went off, they said, oh my God, Hannah has the curse. It ruined everything on the Maverick.
This was later, though, when people had electricity.
When everybody got electricity.
Yeah.
And I've come up to Woodstock, and I was told to contact Arnold Blanche. And that's why I'm here. So Herbie says, Mr. Blanche, or Arnold Blanche, is ill. He can't see anybody. But if you want to stay here, you can stay here, and when Mr. Blanche is well, you can go over and see him. So I went outside and I said to the guy, I found everything I want. Thank you for bringing me over here. And I went back to Harvey White's. So he had a couple of other guys living there that did work around the Maverick, the Barnes boys. And we all slept in the attic in different beds, an unlined attic. There was no running water. There was no toilet. There was, I think the only artist on the Maverick that had a bathroom in the house was Carl Walters, the successful ceramicist. The rent was $100 a year. I'm putting that in for people who are now paying $250 for a one-room efficiency in Woodstock. $100 a year. And that's how I got to Woodstock. And Woodstock was a wonderful, very, very strange place. There were natives and there were artists.
She weighs in a lump about 300 pounds. Nickety, nackety, now, now, now. She sits on the chair and the thing breaks down. Nickety, nackety, neighbor, dum, dappity, willity, wallity, reckon, come swallowty, nickety, nackety, now, now, now.
2 or 3 little buildings have been built in the village that they call galleries, where paintings are for sale. 2 houses are what they call gift shops, but not because they give you anything, but so that summer boarders can buy jewelry and painted cards and lots of other stuff they make. Jim Plough had been in these shops, and many of these things are stamped on the bottom, made in Japan or China. You have to be on your guard if you want the genuine article, made in Woodstock.
The saddle and bridle is up on the shelf. Nickety, nackety, now, now, now. And if you want any more, you can sing it yourself. Nickety, nackety, neighbor, dum, dappity, wallity, wallity, reckon, come swallowty, nickety, nackety, now, now, now.
I have overheard the men in the store talking about a lot of changes they expect in Woodstock. My father won't have the post office in the store much longer because the government is getting a building that won't be anything but a post office. And somebody will run it, not do anything else. Good old Woodstock is gone forever, he said. Take a good look.
Yes, I was the youngest of 5 children, and we had to flee for the usual reason of the pogroms that came for them that were of Jewish, not persuasion necessarily, but descent. And we landed in the Bronx, which is now in the part of the Bronx which is now Harlem, which was exquisite place at the time, tree-lined and so forth. And at about the age of 3, I began to draw and never stopped drawing in crayons. And in my day, there were no art classes for children at all.
I was born in Romania, and when I was 5 years old, my father decided to go. He had relatives here and there, and he wanted to explore a better life, you know, to make a living better. He decided to come to this country. He had relatives in Minneapolis. They found a place for us to live. It was the rear end of a run-down apartment building. It was really awful, where the garbage was and everything, you know. My interest in art started when I had some magazines. I don't know whether it was Saturday Evening Post, but there was some magazine with a lot of pictures. And so I enjoyed copying the faces, you know, and it was fun.
I was also very much concerned with sensation, having experiences. I wanted to have every experience you could have. In those days, you couldn't get any drugs, so I wasn't interested in the drug experience. I matured late sexually before I found out what great ecstasy that was. But in reading novels, I always experienced a passage in some romantic novel where the Duchess of Khosravi-DOCS rode in a dusty carriage for 3 hours to a small chapel in a village, where she entered the chapel and there, transfixed by the experience of Puccichivachi's Madonna, had an ecstatic aesthetic experience that lasted for 3/4 of an hour, and I thought, gee, that would be a wonderful experience for me to have. Since that was available, we had museums, we had pictures like that. So I showed up at the Chicago Art Institute and began looking at the pictures. And I must say that it did not create that aesthetic experience, because I would look at a painting, it would be a lady with a shawl holding a basket of fish in her lap or some other object, and it would simply be a picture of a lady holding a basket of fish. I was not transfixed by any great emotional thing that you're supposed to experience in presence of the Botticelli paintings. But because that experience didn't come quickly and easily, I kept going back to the Chicago Art Institute, and I kept getting interested. I began to prefer one kind of picture to another kind of picture. And I had a job which was in the neighborhood. I could walk to the Art Institute during my lunch hour. So I spent an awful lot of time, and I began to make distinctions.
Well, it was no problem for me because my father was an architect, and when he realized that I wanted to go to art school, he gave me every encouragement. But a little later, after I'd been at the art school for a while, he thought I ought to learn some trade which would support me. And he suggested I study architecture, and I fought this. And just about that time came the crash, the Wall Street crash. And the first people selling apples on the streets were architects.
Eugenie Gershoy and I went to the League together.
I had no idea of doing sculpture, it was only when I went to the League on a scholarship and wanted to join a painting class and stood in line trying to get into register in that class. And there was no room for me. And I turned away in great disappointment, and a very pretty girl, a beautiful little girl in back of me said, "Don't go away, why don't you join the modeling class?" And that was Hannah Small. And we became immediate friends, inseparable.
As an art student living at the Maverick, I honestly thought that I would live in a garret, or the equivalent of a garret, all my life. I really thought so.
Pretty nice garret.
And it was only then when I got with Hannah, we moved out of the Maverick, and it was still the idea that we would be struggling artists all our lives. And it never occurred to us that we would have security.
And that's why you take a teaching job, because you couldn't make a
Well, we
living.
did. When it came after the war, I had to take a teaching job. That was, and these kids don't have it that easy.
One year after his son's untimely death, the deeply shaken Ralph Whitehead died.
I remember very well when I arrived because it was practically the day of the crash on Wall Street. As I told you, I made frames for John Carroll for his show in New York, and I drove them down to New York, all the pictures for his show, and the entire show was sold out before the show opened.
It was at Rand.
But came the crash the day before it opened, and every sale was canceled.
Every sale.
It was
Isn't that
totally
horrible?
sold out, and every sale was canceled.
Every sale was canceled. And John Carroll had built his studio on the basis of these sales.
Yeah, beautiful.
At which point he left Woodstock.
Is that true of most of your group? Was there money behind most of you so
Most.
that you were doing
Well,
this
yeah,
by
we
choice rather than by...
Well, we were doing it by choice.
By choice,
But none of us, well, I don't know how it is. I'm trying to think. No, Johnny had no money. Harry had no background of money. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Was there a
Neither
background
did the
of support?
Walters.
No, I think
That's
that's
right.
maybe true, right?
No, the only one that made money was Carl Walters, who constantly sold pottery.
Most of the people around that I know of had jobs of one kind or another, even if they were artists. It's true that I, for instance, could go and live with my family, who also did not have very much money. Jane could have gone home. Jean, you could have found somebody to help you. But the families weren't rich.
No, but they had enough to see that you did, in a pinch, they'd see you didn't starve.
The economic crisis of the 1930s had shaken the colony badly. In a letter to Washington, pleading for artist subsidies, the Woodstock Artists Association president spoke of the look of worry and despair in many of the faces of Woodstock artists.
Wanting to allocate something in Woodstock, and I went to the school, the one-room schoolhouse, which is the building behind the Grand Union now. And I went in to case the joint and see if I could sell them the idea of getting one of our pictures. And they had just one picture in the whole building. It was a color photograph on the wall, and it was a photograph of the King and Queen of England.
And do you know where any of your work went?
Yes, I was told by the supervisor that I was very popular with insane asylums, and a number of my paintings had been allocated there. They found the low-key work rather restful to the schizophrenics.
Jeannie, where were you working on the
New
project?
York City. I
was working for the sculpture project, doing animals for children, for poor children in hospitals and nursing homes, and some in play courts, and finally for a library in Astoria.
What was your financial status at the time that you got on this project?
I had moved from Woodstock to New York, and I had no funds, but Harry Knight was kind enough to get me on the project on a non-relief basis. And so I was thrown off the project very soon when they cut off all people on non-relief.
Where were you during this time?
Well, I was in Colorado, and I was on the project there, and we had a lady supervisor. So,
And did that make a difference?
well, I want you to know this, that,
Right.
that you know, that there were, at that point, there was equality.
And what kind of work, and do you know where your work went?
It went to Washington, same arrangement, except that I wasn't on it long. I won a mural competition, and as soon as that happened, I no longer qualified for relief. You
Because
see,
you were paid for the
yes,
mural?
I was getting, what was it, $800 or something for a mural. Yeah, about $800, $900 for that mural. That immediately made me a very rich man.
I'd like to add a couple of things to what Manuel said. We also had a woman supervisor, Audrey McMahon, so, you know, there.
Good.
The other thing, as far as the pictures that were supposed to have been sold by the pound, they were taken off the stretchers. I don't know whatever happened to the stretchers, but all the canvases were rolled up and sold to a junk dealer who had a marvelous idea that it would be put around steam pipes to prevent them from sweating. They found out that it didn't work, that they didn't prevent the pipes from sweating, and they weren't very effective. Then a lot of them were picked up by frame makers. One frame maker I know, who will be nameless, bought about 30 or 40 of these canvases, restretched them, and had a very interesting amount of work. A sculptor bought some mural sketches that had been submitted and were also junked. And this was way after all of the projects had stopped. This was when they're being demobilized.
The resentment was, as was suggested before, in the fact that when we were working on the WP or PWP and just painting, there was a good deal of resentment by people about the fact that they thought we were being paid to do nothing.
As far as Roosevelt was concerned, the only pictures he had in his office were pictures of boats. He was Secretary of the Navy. He had no particular interest in art, but these friends of his were very influential. And as a result of establishing these projects, which met with a lot of rejection and all sorts of difficulties, but they were the first approved activity of the government, it was possible for this activity, having been done a long time ago, to be continued to the present day with various kinds of state and county councils of the arts, the endowment of the arts. Those would never have come along if the groundwork, which was the entire project system, had not been laid out at the time it was. It's important to remember that the effect of it is still being felt in this country today.
I was in Woodstock for the first part of it when I did that mural for the Soviet school, but I had been asked onto the project, and I also could not prove that my grandparents, my parents, or my possible progeny were penniless. That was the rule.
It was a problem. That was a problem.
But what I would like to say about it is that from the painter's, my point of view as a painter, it was the most happiest time of my work life, because while we made, does anybody know exactly what, $15 and some cents a week, or 18?
23.86.
New York City.
New York.
Not up here, it was not as much.
Woodstock was $18.30 a week.
Well, why these funny amounts, like 30 cents?
We were getting $80 a
Who knows? However, this is kind of being able to live for a while in an egalitarian society, where everyone you knew had exactly the same world to live in. And
Financially.
Yes, and it's a wonderful feeling. And also, we gave to the government, I believe it was 15 hours of work a week, and the rest of our time we could work for ourselves. And that also was a wonderful way to live, to know that your work will be paid for and hung, and you'll be able to eat, but also you'll have time to work.
And another thing that was exceedingly important, I don't think anyone has mentioned, was that materials were provided. And this was terribly important on the Easel project. Of course, on the mural project, you can understand this, but on the Easel project, this was very important, because if you eked out carefully, you had the materials that you needed. Not only for the work, but a little left over.
I never saw such beautiful relationships between artists in my life. It was simply marvelous.
We were all interested in what the others were doing. We would visit them purposely to see
They're all
what they were
getting the
doing.
same amount of money and being shown in the same places, so there was no competition.
Can you tell us about the 219 strike, which at that time was the largest mass arrest in American history?
The what?
219 strike, 219.
That was the New York thing.
It was around the time where the WPA was beginning to lay off some people, and the offices were taken over by 219 artists.
The Artists Union?
Yeah.
That's right, it was the Artists Union. And they were all taken to court. Some of them had their heads. And they were all piled into these black Mariahs, I think.
Paddy wagons.
Paddy wagons, and they, I know a lovely lady sat on Jack's knee because there had to be more than one layer. And it was up in the Bronx, I believe, where the trial took place.
Correct.
And what was his name?
Mark Antonio.
Mark Antonio. Oh, Vida. That's right.
It was a sit-in.
It was a sit-in, and they were they were just pulled out, you know.
I understand some of the artists were beaten very badly.
I was resisting arrest, and two guards picked me up, one by each arm, and ran me with my feet in the air like this, still resisting arrest.
I don't know about beatings.
Yeah, I read an account by Philip Evers talking about how he was beaten, how this other fellow, Paul Bloch, was beaten unconscious, held onto a post and refused to let go.
Well, 219, that's quite a few.
I came to New York, got on the project, and very soon I became president of our union. We had a union. UOPWA, Local 60. How could I help but take sides? And then the whole process was dramatic. So we saw the possibility of doing some interesting pictures. You see, at the same time, you're involved in this struggle. We're involved in several ways. And then the fact we were aware of what was going on in our world. And how could you help but take sides? We were workers. Let us assume, just for the moment, that the progressives, I call them progressives, or communists, whatever you want, were responsible for organizing this organization of artists. Tell me, who could object to it when the object was to protect the interests of the artists? Tell me. There was no other way existing at that time for the artists to live. The stores where you bought your necessities will no longer give the artists credit. The reason why I left Woodstock when I went to New York is because New York was the center of the world, and Woodstock was a far away someplace which has very little to do with the comfort, with the drama of life at that time. And God knows there's plenty of drama in the world, in this country, in our country.
In 1937, Hervey White received an advance of $1,000 for his autobiography, which made possible a final idealistic venture. A winter maverick on a tract of land he bought in Georgia. There a play would be given each year at Easter time. It was on October 20th, 1944, just before Hervey White was to leave the Maverick for St. Mary's. He died in his sleep in the cabin he called 6x8.
Last winter was a hard one, Miss Valley, did you say? Well, yourself that knows that it is for me today. Your husband was the only man sat behind the wall. My old man McGinnis couldn't get a job at all. Right up, Mrs. Riley, don't give away the blues. You and I'll cut a shine, new bonnets and new shoes. Here the young'uns cry.
Both White and Whitehead before him were buried in the Artists' Cemetery. The cemetery symbolized the separation of artists and villagers. Some say that the first artists to die had been refused space at the Woodstock Cemetery. Others say that the artists' families believed that they were too important to lie forever among ordinary folks. So the Artists' Cemetery was organized within the site of the old one, but at a higher elevation and a better view of Overlook Mountain.
Take no dinner wine. One thing that I'd like to say, your old man and mine. Right up, Mrs. Riley, don't give away the blues. You and I'll cut a shine, new bonnets and new shoes. We'll hear the young'uns cry, neither sigh nor sob. We'll wait till time gets better, McGinnis get a job. Springtime is coming, work we'll surely get. McGinnis go back the street again, you make a handsome clerk. See him climb the ladder, nimble as a fox. Face he's a boy can handle the old three-cornered box. Right up, Mrs. Riley, don't give away the blues. You and I'll cut a shine, new bonnets and new shoes. Hear the young'uns cry, neither sigh nor sob. Time's all got better, McGinnis got his job.